Welcome to Caledonia Sleeps, your peaceful escape into the heart of Scotland. The night is quiet here in the Highlands. Beyond the window, mist clings to the steep sides of the mountains, their dark shapes rising like ancient sentinels against a pale winter sky. Below, the waters of Loch Leven lie still and cold, reflecting nothing but the deepening twilight. Inside, the peat fire burns in the hearth, its glow painting the walls in shades of amber and shadow. Tonight, we journey together into Glencoe, the Glen of Weeping. This is a place where history refuses to sleep, where the stones remember, where on certain nights, when the mist rolls thick through the valley, the past walks beside you like a companion you cannot quite see. It is a place of terrible beauty, of tragedy carved into the very landscape, of stories that have been whispered around Highland fires for more than 300 years. We will walk carefully through the glen tonight. We will hear the story of betrayal that stained these mountains with blood. We will meet Corrag, the seer who tried to warn of disaster and whose curse still echoes in the waters of the loch. We will visit Eilean Munde, the island of the dead, where clan chiefs and common folk lie side by side in the earth, and we will discover old mysteries still, spirits and beings that walked this land long before the MacDonalds made it their home. So settle yourself by the fire. Let the wind outside whisper its ancient songs, and let us step together into Glencoe, where memory lives in the mist. The landscape itself tells a story. Glencoe is a narrow valley, 8 miles long, carved between mountains that rise like walls on either side. To the south stands Bedian Nambian, the peak of the mountains. To the north, the steep slopes of Unach Iach, the notched ridge, and at the western entrance, the iconic pyramid of Buccleuch of Moor, the great shepherd of Etive, stands guard. These mountains have watched over the glen for millennia. They watched when the Bronze Age people carved the Ballachulish Goddess from alderwood. They watched when the Romans tried and failed to conquer the Highlands. They watched when the MacDonalds made this isolated valley their stronghold. And they watched on that February morning in 1692, when trust was broken and blood stained the snow. The MacDonalds of Glencoe were a sept, a branch of Clan Donald, one of the great clans of the Highlands. They were led by Alistair MacIan, the 12th chief, a man in his 60s when our story takes its darkest turn. Contemporary accounts describe him as a large man with a presence to match the mountains themselves, white hair flowing to his shoulders, a long white beard, a figure of authority and respect. His people lived scattered throughout the glen in small settlements. In Vercoe, where the chief himself dwelled, Inverrigan to the east, Achnacon further up the valley, Achtriachtan at the far end, where archaeological excavations have revealed the foundations of homes that were built after the massacre and inhabited well into the 18th century. Life in Glencoe was not easy, but it was home. The MacDonalds raised cattle, grew what crops they could in the thin soil, fished the loch, hunted in the mountains. They spoke Gaelic, sang the old songs, told stories around the fire on long winter nights. And like all Highland clans, they lived by the ancient laws of hospitality. In the Highlands, hospitality was not merely courtesy, it was sacred. If a traveller knocked at your door, even an enemy, you welcomed them. You shared your fire, your food, your roof. For the duration of their stay, they were under your protection. To harm a guest or to betray a host was to commit murder under trust, the most heinous crime imaginable. This was the bedrock of Highland society. Without it, none could survive the harsh winters, the isolation, the dangers of mountain and moor. Picture a November evening in 1691. The sun sets early this far north, and by 4 o'clock the glen is dim. Smoke rises from the scattered houses, peat fires burning against the cold. The smell of burning peat, earthy and ancient, drifts on the wind. Cattle low in their byres. Children's voices carry on the air, speaking Gaelic, laughing. Inside the houses, families gather. Oatcakes bake on the stone. Stories are told. Songs are sung. The MacDonalds have lived this way for generations. They have no reason to think the pattern will break. But in Edinburgh, far to the south, a different kind of story is being written. Before we speak of politics and betrayal, we must meet Corrag. In every Highland community, there were those who walked between worlds, the wise women, the seers, those who could read the signs in water and stone, in the flight of birds, in the dreams that came in the darkest hours before dawn. They were healers and midwives, herbalists and fortune tellers. Some communities cherished them, others feared them, most did both. Highland folklore speaks of Corrag, a wise woman whose story has become woven into the very fabric of Glencoe's memory. The traditions passed down through generations describe her as someone who lived a solitary life high in the mountains, a figure of what the old accounts call outstanding badness. But the tales that survive paint a more complex picture. Corrag knew herbs and could heal. She could find lost things. She could read the future in the patterns of smoke and water. And though people feared her power, they also sought her help. In the winter of 1691, as political tensions mounted across Scotland, Corrag began to have visions, dark visions. She saw soldiers, she saw fire, she saw blood on snow. She saw the people of Glencoe fleeing into the mountains, into a February blizzard, into death. The story tells that she tried to warn them. She went to the settlements and spoke of what she had seen, but her warnings fell on deaf ears. Perhaps they thought her mad. Perhaps they could not imagine that such a thing could happen. Not here, not to them. Perhaps they simply could not believe that the ancient laws of hospitality could be so brutally broken. And so, the legend goes, Corrag watched and waited and knew that disaster was coming. In 1688, the Glorious Revolution had swept King James II and VII from his thrones. William of Orange, a Protestant Dutchman, had taken his place, ruling jointly with his wife Mary. But in Scotland, many Highland clans remained loyal to James, the Stuart king, the Catholic monarch who had fled to France. The new government in Edinburgh was determined to bring the Highlands to heel. In August 1691, King William issued a proclamation. Every clan chief must take an oath of allegiance to him by the 1st of January 1692. Those who refused would face the full force of the law, fire and sword. But there was a complication. The clan chiefs had already sworn loyalty to James. To break that oath and to swear to William felt like betrayal. They needed James's permission, and James, safely across the water in France, was in no hurry to give it. December arrived. Snow fell in the mountains, and still no word from James. On the 28th of December, a messenger finally reached Glencoe. James had given his permission. The chiefs could take the oath to William without dishonour, but time was running desperately short. MacIan had only 3 days to reach the nearest magistrate and swear allegiance before the deadline. On the 31st of December, the old chief set out for Fort William, some 12 miles away through winter conditions. He arrived to discover that there was no magistrate there authorised to receive the oath. The garrison commander, Colonel Hill, was sympathetic but could do nothing. MacIan would have to ride on to Inveraray, more than 60 miles south, through the mountains in the depths of winter. Picture that journey. An old man, white-haired, exhausted, riding through a January blizzard, the wind howling through the passes, snow driving horizontal, the path barely visible, his horse struggling through drifts. 7 days it took him, 7 days of frozen hell, before he finally reached Inveraray. It was the 6th of January when MacIan finally stood before the sheriff and took the oath of allegiance to King William. 6 days late, but he had done his best. The sheriff accepted the oath, wrote it down, and assured the old chief that it would be sent to Edinburgh. MacIan rode home through the snow, believing the danger had passed. He was wrong. In Edinburgh, John Dalrymple, Master of Stair and Secretary of State for Scotland, saw an opportunity. He had long despised the Highland clans, viewing them as backward, lawless obstacles to Scotland's progress, and he particularly despised the MacDonalds of Glencoe, who had a reputation, deserved or not, for cattle raiding and general lawlessness. When Dalrymple learned that MacIan's oath had been late, he chose to reject it. He drew up orders for the extirpation, the rooting out of the MacDonalds of Glencoe. The orders were signed by King William himself, and so the trap was set. In late January 1692, a company of soldiers arrived in Glencoe, 120 men of the Earl of Argyll's regiment, led by Captain Robert Campbell of Glenlyon. They came in peace, they said. They needed shelter, provisions, winter quarters. The MacDonalds welcomed them. This was the Highland way, host and guest, the ancient law. The soldiers were billeted throughout the glen, housed in MacDonald homes, sleeping in MacDonald beds, eating MacDonald bread. For nearly 2 weeks they lived side by side. Captain Glenlyon was 60 years old, a Campbell, yes, but not a particularly fierce one. He was a failed businessman, a drinker, a gambler in debt. He had taken a military commission late in life, largely out of financial desperation. But he was a man, and he broke bread with the MacDonalds. He played cards with them. He spoke with their children. MacIan's sons treated him as a guest of honour. On the evening of the 12th of February, everything seemed normal. Picture that night, families gathering after the day's work, peat fires burning bright, the soldiers, by now familiar faces, sitting with their hosts, stories told in Gaelic and English, laughter, perhaps a fiddle playing, children sleepy, heading to bed, adults lingering by the fire, no one sensing what the dawn would bring. At 5 o'clock that evening, Captain Glenlyon received his written orders. You are hereby ordered to fall upon the rebels, the MacDonalds of Glencoe, and put all to the sword under 70. You are to have a special care that the old fox and his sons do upon no account escape your hands. You are to secure all the avenues, that no man escape. This you are to put in execution at 5 o'clock precisely. The orders came by the King's special command. Not all the officers obeyed without question. Lieutenant Francis Farquhar and Lieutenant Gilbert Kennedy both refused the order. They broke their swords rather than commit murder under trust. They were imprisoned for their insubordination, though later exonerated and released. They would testify against their superior officers in the inquiries that followed, but most of the soldiers obeyed. That night, as the MacDonalds slept, the soldiers prepared. Some historians suggest that a few soldiers, unable to stomach what was to come, whispered warnings to the families. Certainly some MacDonalds escaped, but others, trusting in the ancient laws, sleeping soundly in their beds with guests under their roof, suspected nothing. At 5 o'clock in the morning of the 13th of February 1692, in the freezing darkness before dawn, the signal was given. The massacre began simultaneously in 3 settlements across the glen. At Invercoe, soldiers burst into McKeon's house. The old chief was still in bed, reaching for his clothes when they shot him. He died there, in his own home, murdered by men who had eaten at his table the night before. His wife was stripped naked and thrown out into the February snow, where she died of exposure. Throughout the glen, the horror unfolded. Men dragged from their beds and shot, women fleeing with children, houses set ablaze, the flames bright against the snow, smoke rising black into the wintry night. The sounds of gunfire, of screaming, of terror echoing off the mountain walls. 38 MacDonalds were murdered outright that morning. Men, women and children, all under the age of 70, as the orders specified. But the death toll did not end there. Many more fled into the mountains, into a February blizzard, with no shelter, no food, no warm clothing. They died of exposure in the snow, frozen on the mountainsides, hidden in caves, collapsed in the heather. The exact number will never be known. Some estimates place the total dead at nearly 100. When dawn finally came, pale and cold, the glen was transformed. Houses still burning, bodies lying in the snow, blood on the white ground. Survivors huddled in the mountains, watching the smoke rise, not daring to return. McKeon's body was recovered from the ruins. His people carried him to the shore of Loch Leven, and from there by boat to Eilean Munde, the sacred burial island. There, the 12th chief of the MacDonalds of Glencoe was laid to rest among his ancestors. When news of the massacre finally spread beyond the Highlands, reaching Edinburgh, London, even Paris, the reaction was one of shock and revulsion. This was not war. This was not justice. This was murder under trust, a violation of the most sacred Highland law. A Scottish Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry eventually determined that the killings constituted as murder. But prosecutions were few. Captain Glenlyon died in Bruges in 1696, his regiment having been sent to fight in Flanders. Many of the other officers were conveniently abroad when the commission sought testimony. John Dalrymple, the architect of the massacre, escaped serious punishment. King William, whose signature was on the orders, was absolved of direct responsibility. The Campbells, who provided most of the soldiers, were blamed by many. For generations afterwards, some MacDonald establishments would display signs reading "No Campbells." The hatred ran deep, but the truth was more complex. This was not a clan feud. This was government policy, a calculated act of state terror designed to cow the Highland clans into submission. The survivors eventually returned to Glencoe. They rebuilt their homes. They buried their dead. They tried to continue, but the glen would never be the same. The massacre had broken something fundamental, a trust that could never be fully repaired. And here the story returns to Corrag. The legend, preserved by generations of storytellers around Glencoe, speaks of what happened next. According to tradition, on the morning of the 13th of February, as the sun rose over a blood-stained glen, Corrag emerged from the mountains where she had spent the night. She walked through the devastation, houses still smouldering, bodies in the snow, the smell of burning peat mixed with the copper tang of blood. Her warnings had been ignored, her visions had come to pass, but the people she had tried to save were dead or had fled. Among the ruins of MacIan's house, she found his broadsword, the weapon of the chief, bloodied now, lying in the snow beside his slain body. She picked it up, heavy in her hands, still warm from the house fire that had consumed everything. Corrag carried the sword to the shore of Loch Leven. The water was dark and cold, ice forming at the edges. She stood there for a long moment, the smoke from the burning houses drifting across the loch behind her, the first light of dawn touching the peaks of the mountains. And then she spoke, her voice carrying across the water, her words half curse, half blessing, all power. So long as this sword lays undisturbed by man, no man from this glen will die in battle. She cast the broadsword into the loch. It sank immediately, disappearing into the dark water, down to the bottom, where the light never reaches, where the cold is eternal. It was a protection. The men of Glencoe had suffered enough. Let no more die by the sword. Let the water keep the weapon. Let it rest undisturbed. And let the men of the glen live. And for 224 years, Corrag's protection held. The MacDonalds of Glencoe fought at Culloden in 1746. That terrible final battle of the Jacobite cause. Many Highland clans were slaughtered on Culloden Moor, but no man from Glencoe died in the battle. They fought at Waterloo, at Balaclava during the Crimean War, in the Boer War. Through every conflict, the men of Glencoe survived. The prophecy became legend. The sword at the bottom of the loch, protecting those who walked the glen above. Until June of 1916. The First World War was raging across Europe. Britain needed every resource, every advantage, and Loch Leven needed to be deepened to allow larger ships to pass, part of the war effort. A dredger was brought from Glasgow to clear the loch bed. On the 30th of June, 1916, a worker operating the dredger pulled something from the bottom of the loch, an old sword handle, corroded, ancient, the blade long since rusted away. That evening, he took his find to a pub in Ballachulish to show it off, a curiosity, a piece of history. The locals who saw it went white with terror. They knew the legend. They knew Corrag's words. They seized the handle and rushed back to the loch, throwing it back into the water, hoping desperately that they had acted in time, that the curse could be averted. But it was too late. The next day was the 1st of July 1916, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, one of the bloodiest and most brutal battles in human history. And on that day, 7 men from the village of Glencoe died in battle, the first men from the Glen to die in combat since the massacre of 1692. 224 years of protection, broken by a dredger's blade. Corrag had a second prophecy, one that still resonates today. She foretold that if the narrows of Loch Leven were ever bridged, a great flood would come and sweep away the entirety of Glencoe. For centuries, no one dared build a bridge, but in the 1970s, plans were drawn up for the Ballachulish Bridge, a modern structure to replace the ferry that had plied the water for generations. When the engineers learned of Corrag's prophecy, they found a loophole. They would never technically complete the bridge. If you look carefully at the concrete support on the south side of the Ballachulish Bridge, you will see that one bolt is missing, one of 24 bolts, deliberately never installed. The bridge, therefore, is not finished. Corrag's prophecy cannot be fulfilled. That bolt remains missing to this day. No one has dared to install it, just in case. As for Corrag herself, she died some time after the massacre, her age and date unknown. According to tradition, she should have been buried on Eilean Munde alongside the clan chiefs, an honour recognising her attempts to warn the MacDonalds and her protection of the Glen. But on the day of her funeral, a storm arose on Loch Leven. The waters grew too rough for boats to cross, and so Corrag was buried on the shore near Ballachulish instead, denied her final resting place among the people she had tried to save. Some say her spirit still wanders the shores of the loch, watching over Glencoe, keeping her eternal vigil. In the middle of Loch Leven there is an island, Eilean Munde, the island of St. Mundus, the island of the dead. It is a small place, perhaps 300 yards long, barely visible from the shore unless you know where to look. Trees grow there now, birch and alder, their branches bare in winter, green in summer. But beneath the grass and among the trees lie over 300 graves, perhaps more, the final resting place of clan chiefs and commoners, of warriors and women, of children who never grew old. The island is named for St. Fintan Mundus, who came from Iona in the 17th century, bringing Christianity to this remote corner of the Highlands. He built a chapel there, a small stone building that became a place of worship and pilgrimage. The chapel burned in 1495, but was rebuilt in the 16th century. The last service was held in July 1653. Now only the 4 walls remain, roofless, open to the sky, filled with grass and the weathered remnants of gravestones. For centuries, Eilean Munde was a sacred burial ground for 3 clans who shared this part of the Highlands: the MacDonalds of Glencoe, the Camerons of Callart, the Stewarts of Ballachulish and Ardshiel. Even when these clans were at war with each other, even when blood feuds raged and cattle were raided and men killed in skirmishes, Eilean Munde remained neutral ground, sacred, inviolate. The dead had claim to it, and the dead cared nothing for the quarrels of the living. Each clan had its own landing place on the island, its own port for the boats that carried the dead across the water. The MacDonalds used the port of the dead, facing Ballachulish. When someone died in Glencoe, their body was wrapped in a shroud, placed in a boat, and rowed across the loch. Pipers would play laments. Family members would weep. The boat would arrive at the port of the dead, and the body would be carried up the slope to be buried in MacDonald soil, marked with a stone if the family could afford one. Many of the gravestones are slate quarried from the famous Ballachulish quarry just across the water. Slate is an unusual material for gravestones, but it is what was available, and it carves beautifully. The inscriptions where they survive are in English and Gaelic, recording names and dates, sometimes a verse or a prayer. Alistair MacIan, the 12th chief of the MacDonalds of Glencoe, murdered in his bed on the morning of the massacre, lies somewhere on this island. The exact location of his grave is unknown now, the stone perhaps sunk into the earth or covered by grass, but he is there, resting with his ancestors and his people. The last burial on Eilean Munde took place in 1972. Christina MacDonald Sharp, born in Glencoe, had moved to London as a young woman, but maintained her connection to the Glen all her life. When she returned to visit, she would slip back into speaking Gaelic as easily as breathing, and she was clear in her wishes. When she died, she wanted to be buried on the island among her ancestors, and so she was, the last person to be laid to rest in that ancient ground. The soil is too thin now, the island too fragile for more burials. Christina MacDonald Sharp will be the last. Today, Eilean Munde is uninhabited. No one lives there. Few visit. The island is accessible only by boat, and the water can be rough. The grass grows high. There are no paths. The gravestones tilt and sink. Some are legible, many are not. And the island has developed a reputation. It is haunted. Picture approaching the island by boat as the sun sets. The water is cold and dark. Seals watch from the rocks, their eyes following you. The trees on the island are silhouettes against the sky. As you draw closer, the shapes of the gravestones become visible, rising from the grass like broken teeth. You land your boat on the rocky shore. The island is silent, not peaceful, just silent. You walk among the graves. The grass is thick and tangled. You have to watch your footing, because beneath the grass, the ground is uneven. There are gaps where the earth has settled or been disturbed. Some of the old graves have slate slabs laid flat over them, and beneath those slabs you can see darkness, voids, spaces where the earth has collapsed inward. You do not look too closely. You do not want to see what might be down there. The chapel ruin stands at the centre of the island. its four walls still intact but roofless. Inside, more gravestones, some flat on the ground, grass growing between them. The wind whistles through the empty windows, and you feel, unmistakably, that you are not welcome here. The writer Alison Littlewood visited Eilean Munde and later tried multiple times to write about the experience. She said the island resisted her pen. It did not fit with the clacking of computer keys or the bright shine of a laptop screen. She said that when people ask if she believes in ghosts, she says no, but then adds, "I have stood in a place that felt haunted." She described the feeling of trespass, the sense that this place belonged to the dead, and the dead had been left alone for so long that they had gotten used to it. Perhaps they resented intrusion. Perhaps they simply did not want the living there. Other visitors have reported similar experiences. The feeling of being watched, cold spots that have no source, a reluctance to look behind you because you're certain something is there. The sense that the island is judging you, weighing whether you have a right to walk among these graves. Some have seen figures among the gravestones at twilight, shapes that might be people, standing still, watching. When you look directly at them, they are gone, but in your peripheral vision, they return. On still nights, when the loch is calm, people on the shore have heard sounds carrying across the water from the island. Gaelic voices, weeping, the low mournful sound of bagpipes playing a lament. And when boats approach to investigate, the sounds stop. The island falls silent again. Every year, volunteers come to Eilean Munde to clear the graves, to cut back the grass, to make the place accessible for descendants who wish to visit. They report strange occurrences, tools that go missing, only to reappear in a different location. Sudden temperature drops, even on warm days. The overwhelming feeling that they should leave and that they have stayed too long. But they also report a sense of gratitude when the work is done, as if the island, or those who rest there, appreciate the effort, as if the dead want to be remembered, even if they do not want to be disturbed. Perhaps Alistair McKeon walks among the graves, keeping watch over his people. Perhaps all the dead of Glencoe, those who fell in the massacre and those who lived long, peaceful lives, gather on the island in the darkness. Perhaps they look across the water toward the glen, toward the mountains that have always defined their world, and remember, Eilean Munde is a threshold place, a boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. And like all threshold places, it has power, it has presence, it has memory. The island is not evil, but it is not for the living, and it makes that clear to anyone who sets foot on its shore. Eilean Munde is not the only place in Glencoe where the dead refuse to rest. The glen itself is haunted. The mountains hold memory. The stones remember. And on certain nights, particularly on the anniversary of the massacre, the past bleeds through into the present. Every year on the 13th of February, people gather in Glencoe to remember. The Clan Donald Society holds a wreath-laying ceremony at the Massacre Monument. Descendants come from around the world. Gaelic prayers are spoken. Pipes play laments. It is a sombre, respectful occasion, but it is also a night where the boundary between worlds grows thin. Locals and visitors alike have reported experiences on anniversary nights and at other times throughout the year. The most common is a feeling of overwhelming sadness that seems to come from nowhere. You will be walking through the glen on a bright summer afternoon, the mountains beautiful, the sky clear, and suddenly you are engulfed in grief. Not your own grief, something older, deeper, the accumulated sorrow of all who died here, of all who fled into the snow, of all who lost family and home and hope on that February morning. Some have reported seeing the massacre itself, or fragments of it, replayed in the mist. Shadowy figures running, flames where no fire burns, the sound of gunfire echoing off the mountains, screams carried on the wind, and then, as suddenly as it began, it stops. The glen is quiet again, but you are left shaken, uncertain of what you witnessed. Near where McKeon's house once stood at Invercoe, people have seen a woman. She appears at dusk or dawn, standing near the water, wringing her hands and keening. The sound is unmistakably Gaelic, the traditional mourning cry, high and terrible. She is believed to be McKeon's widow, stripped naked and cast out into the snow, still searching for her murdered husband, still mourning after more than 3 centuries. Bagpipe music is heard throughout the glen, particularly near Eilean Munde and in the old settlement sites. Not the bright, celebratory tunes of weddings and gatherings, but laments, slow, mournful pieces that speak of loss and death. Pipers have played at every Highland funeral since time immemorial. It seems they still play for the dead of Glencoe, invisible but audible, their music drifting across the water and up the mountain sides. Hikers and climbers, particularly those on the mountains at dawn, have reported seeing figures fleeing up the slopes. Men, women and children, moving fast, looking back over their shoulders in terror. They appear most often in February, reenacting that desperate escape into the blizzard. When you try to follow them, to see where they go, they vanish into the mist, but the sense of their fear remains, palpable and haunting. Perhaps the most heartbreaking reports are of children's voices, laughter and Gaelic songs, the sounds of children playing, echoing from empty glens and abandoned settlement sites, and then, suddenly, the laughter turns to screaming, and then silence, nothing but the wind and the sound of your own heartbeat. Not all the ghosts are victims. Some appear to be soldiers, men in old military uniforms, walking through settlements with expressions of guilt and horror. Perhaps these are the ghosts of the soldiers who warned families, who refused to participate, who have been haunted by their actions or inactions for 3 centuries. Or perhaps they are the ghosts of those who obeyed orders and now cannot find peace. There is also Lubealt Lodge, a ruined hunting lodge in Lochaber Hills near Glencoe. In 1973, 2 young climbers took shelter there for the night. What happened during those dark hours has been documented in a BBC podcast, but the details are deeply unsettling. They reported an oppressive presence, the overwhelming feeling of being watched by something hostile, sounds of footsteps where no one walked, the sensation of being pushed, of hands on their shoulders trying to force them out. They fled before dawn and never returned. Since then, other climbers have reported similar experiences at Lubealt. Many avoid the ruin entirely. Those who do venture inside speak of cold spots in the middle of summer, nausea, panic attacks, an inexplicable rage that seems to fill the space. Some theorise that the lodge sits on or near a place where massacre victims died of exposure, that their suffering has soaked into the very walls. Picture spending a night at Lubealt Lodge. The sun sets early in the Highlands. Darkness comes fast. The wind howls through the broken windows, through the gaps in the walls. You huddle by your small camping stove, trying to get warm, and then you hear it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. You shine your torch toward the sound. Nothing there. But the footsteps continue, and then you feel it. The cold, not the cold of winter wind, but something else. Something that comes from inside, and you know with absolute certainty that you are not alone, that something is in that ruin with you, and it does not want you there. The landscape itself seems to remember. Glencoe is beautiful, undeniably, dramatically so, but it is not a comfortable beauty. The mountains loom. The weather changes in minutes, from clear skies to driving rain, from calm to storm, and always, always, there is that sense of being watched, of eyes on you, of the past pressing close. Glencoe is what the Celts called a thin place, a place where the veil between the living world and the underworld is gossamer thin, where the past and present exist side by side, where the dead are never quite gone. Before the MacDonalds, before the Campbells, before the clans and the Gaels, and even the Picts, there were others in Glencoe. In November 1888, workers were digging foundations for a house in North Ballachulish, on the shores of Loch Leven. About 6 feet down, deep in the peat, they found something extraordinary, a carved wooden figure, life-size, nearly 5 feet tall, carved from a single piece of alder wood, a female figure, naked, with her hands placed on her belly, quartz pebbles for eyes, and a face both serene and unsettling, gazing out across the centuries with an expression impossible to read. She had been placed face down in the peat, surrounded by a wicker structure, perhaps a cage or a shrine. The peat had preserved her for an unimaginable span of time. When she was pulled from the ground, the workers stood staring, uncertain what they had found: an idol, a goddess, a remnant of a world long forgotten. Radiocarbon dating would eventually place her creation at around 600 BC, 2,600 years old, the oldest human figure ever found in Scotland. She predates the Romans. She predates written Scottish history. She is Bronze Age verging into Iron Age, a relic of people whose names we will never know, whose language is lost, whose beliefs are shadows. When alder wood is fresh carved, the exposed wood is rich orange, almost golden. She would have been a striking figure, glowing in firelight or sunlight, placed where she could overlook the dangerous straits that connect Loch Leven to the sea. Similar wooden figures have been found across Europe, always at sacred places, springs, wetlands, crossings between water and land. They are thought to represent deities, spirits of the place, protective figures to whom travellers made offerings before attempting dangerous passages. The Ballachulish Goddess, as she came to be known, likely served that purpose. The narrows of Loch Leven are treacherous, strong currents, sudden storms, a place where boats could easily capsize, where people could drown. To the Bronze Age inhabitants of this land, the goddess watched over the crossing. Perhaps travellers left offerings at her feet: food, weapons, precious objects. Perhaps they prayed to her for safe passage. Perhaps they believed she had the power to calm the waters or stir them to fury. Her hands rest on her belly, a gesture that has sparked much speculation. Pregnancy, fertility, protection of the unborn, or perhaps a gesture of power, of sovereignty, of control over life and death. We will never know for certain, but the pose suggests she was more than decoration. She was important. She was revered. She was feared. Unfortunately, the Victorian archaeologists who first examined her had no way to preserve waterlogged wood. They tried to keep her wet, but could not find a container large enough. Eventually, they allowed her to dry out. During transport to Edinburgh, she broke at the ankles. As she dried, the wood warped and cracked. Large pieces split off. The figure that now sits in the National Museum of Scotland looks very different from the goddess the Bronze Age people created. She is elongated, twisted, her face even more mysterious in its distortion, eerie rather than merely ancient. A replica showing what she originally looked like is on display at the Glencoe Folk Museum, and that replica has an interesting effect on people. When shown to local school children, reactions vary wildly. Some find her benevolent, protective, a guardian. Others refuse to touch her, finding her threatening, unsettling. The power is still there, even in a modern copy. 2,600 years later, and she still evokes something primal. The area where she was buried is rich in Bronze Age remains, burial cists, worked flint, arrowheads and spear points, wooden vessels and organic materials preserved by the same peat that protected the goddess. There was a settlement here, a community of people who worked the land and fished the loch, and lived in ways we can only dimly imagine. They carved this goddess. They gave her quartz eyes. They placed her overlooking the water. And when her time was done, for whatever reason, they took her down and buried her face down in the peat, surrounded by wicker. Was this a ritual, a desecration, a careful preservation, a hope that someday she might be found again? We do not know. What we do know is this: the Ballachulish Goddess is the oldest witness to Glencoe's long history. She was there long before the massacre. She watched the Romans march north and fail to conquer. She watched the Picts defend their land. She watched the Gaels arrive and Vikings raid, the clans form and fight and endure. She watched MacIan ride to Inverary through the snow. She watched the soldiers come. She watched the massacre unfold. She watched the survivors rebuild. And she watches still, from her case in Edinburgh, silent and eternal. The land remembers what we forget, and the goddess knows what we can only guess. Glencoe's human history is dramatic enough, but the land also has its older, stranger inhabitants, the supernatural beings that feature in Highland folklore, creatures that belong to the mountains and waters, predating humanity itself. Rising to the south of the glen is Ben Aveir, the mountain of the thunderbolt. The name comes from the Gaelic word for serpent or dragon, and legend says that the mountain was once home to exactly that. The Vear was a dragon-like creature, cunning and cruel, with a particular taste for mischief and a hunger for village children. She made her lair high in the mountains, descending into the glen during storms when her power was at its peak. Thunder and lightning were said to herald her arrival, the sound of her massive tail thrashing across the landscape, her venomous screeches echoing through Glencoe. For the villagers, she was a constant terror, a danger that could not be ignored or reasoned with. Many tried to defeat the Vear, warriors with swords, hunters with spears. All failed. Human strength was no match for her scales and fire and fury, until a ferryman named Charles came up with a different plan. He was not a warrior. He was clever. During a particularly violent storm, Charles lured the beast onto his boat using burning animal carcasses as bait. As she descended from the mountains, drawn by the smell of roasting meat, Charles waited. The Vear landed on his boat, her attention entirely on the feast before her, and as she gorged herself, Charles, hidden among the flames and smoke, drove his spear through her throat. The dragon died, her body sank into the loch. Her spirit, some say, fled into the mountains that bears her name. And to this day, Ben Avejar is still associated with storms. When thunder rolls across Glencoe, when lightning splits the sky, locals will say the Vejar is restless. Her memory lives in the stone. The waters of Glencoe harbour their own dangers. The Ehushka, the water horse, is one of the most feared creatures in Highland folklore. It appears at the edge of dark loch pools, looking like a beautiful horse, sleek and gentle. Travellers, especially children, are drawn to it. They reach out to stroke its mane, and the moment they touch it, they are stuck fast. The Ehushka plunges into the water, dragging its victim down to drown and devour. Parents warned their children never to approach a horse standing alone near water, never to touch one they did not recognise. The Ehushka was real in the sense that the danger was real. Water could kill. Drowning was common. The creature was a way of teaching caution, of making children understand that beauty could hide death. The Tar Evushka, the water bull, was less malevolent, but still formidable. It protected the underwater places, the deep parts of lochs where sunlight never reached. Fishermen spoke of seeing its surface occasionally, massive and dark, before disappearing back into the depths. It was not evil, but it was powerful, and it demanded respect. And then there were the Selkies, the seal folk, who occasionally visited from the coast. Selkies could shed their seal skins and walk on land in human form. They were beautiful, mysterious, and tragic. Stories tell of Selkie women marrying human men, living on land for years, raising children. But always, always they longed for the sea, and when they found their hidden sealskin, they would return to the water, leaving their human families behind. Love could not hold them. The sea's call was stronger. Glencoe is also home to the Sidhe, the fairy folk of the Highlands. They are not the tiny winged creatures of children's stories. The Highland Sidhe are powerful, dangerous, and neither wholly good nor wholly evil. They live in the mountains, in hidden places, in the hollow hills. They can bless or curse, they can help or hinder, and they must always, always be treated with respect. Rowan wood, with its bright red berries, was carried as protection against fairy enchantment. Iron, which the Sidhe cannot bear to touch, was kept close at hand. Offerings of milk and bread were left in wild places, small gifts to maintain good relations, and the old places, the standing stones, the burial mounds, the hilltops where the veil was thin, were treated with caution. You did not disturb what lay there. You did not mock. You passed respectfully and quietly, and you hoped the Sidhe would let you pass unmolested. These creatures are not separate from the history of Glencoe. They are woven into it. They are part of how people understood the world, how they explained the inexplicable, how they coped with danger and loss and the wild beauty of the Highlands. The Veher and the Echushka, the She and the Selkies, they are as much a part of the glen as the mountains themselves. Today, Glencoe is a popular tourist destination. Visitors come for the hiking, the climbing, the stunning scenery. The glen has served as filming locations for movies like Harry Potter and The Prisoner of Azkaban, Rob Roy and Highlander. The dramatic landscape, the towering peaks, the sweeping vistas are instantly recognisable. Glencoe has become iconic. The National Trust for Scotland operates a visitor centre where you can learn about the massacre, watch a short film narrated by actor Rory McCann, and explore exhibits about Highland life and culture. The Glencoe Folk Museum, run by volunteers, houses an extraordinary collection of artefacts, including the replica of the Ballachulish Goddess and a room dedicated to the massacre, with audio testimony and historical documents. Every year on the 13th of February, the Clan Donald Society of Edinburgh holds a memorial service. Descendants of the MacDonalds travel from around the world to attend. Wreaths are laid at the Massacre Monument, a tall Celtic cross that stands in the glen. Gaelic prayers are spoken, bagpipes play laments. It is a quiet, dignified ceremony, a way of ensuring that the dead are not forgotten. The village of Glencoe itself is built on or near the sites of the old settlements where the massacre took place. Modern homes stand where the MacDonald's houses once burned. Roads run through the glen where survivors fled, but the mountains are unchanged. The loch is the same, and the sense of history, of tragedy, of memory remains. People still approach the land with respect. Eilean Munde remains undisturbed, except for the annual volunteer maintenance. The Ballachulish Bridge still has its missing bolt, and when storms roll through Glencoe, when the mist comes down thick, when the wind howls through the peaks, people remember the old stories. They remember the Corrag and her warnings. They remember the Veher in the thunder. They remember the MacDonalds fleeing into the snow. Glencoe is a place where the past refuses to be past, where history lives in the landscape, where if you listen carefully, you can still hear the echoes of voices speaking Gaelic, of children laughing, of pipers playing laments for the dead. Why does Glencoe feel haunted? Perhaps because it is. Perhaps because some tragedies are too great to fade. Perhaps because betrayal of trust, murder under hospitality, the breaking of sacred laws, these things leave scars that cannot heal. Or perhaps the glen itself has a memory, written into the stone and water and wind, a record that cannot be erased. Whatever the reason, Glencoe remains a place where you feel the weight of centuries, where beauty and sorrow walk hand in hand, where the mountains watch and remember and wait. The fire has burned low. Outside the window, snow is falling now, soft and steady. blanketing the mountains in silence. Loch Leven is dark, barely visible in the winter night. Across the water, the lights of Ballachulish glow warm against the cold. We have walked together through Glencoe tonight, through the story of the MacDonalds and their tragic end, through Corrag's warnings and her curse, still echoing in the waters of the loch, through Eilean Munde, the island of the dead, where the past keeps vigil, through encounters with ghosts and supernatural beings, with the Ballachulish Goddess and her ancient watch. What does Glencoe teach us? Perhaps it reminds us that trust is sacred, that hospitality is a bond that must not be broken, that the past is never truly past, but lives on in the places where great events occurred, that the land itself has memory, written into its bones, and that memory can reach across centuries to touch us still. Glencoe is a place of beauty and sorrow, of mountains that have seen too much, of waters that hold secrets, of stones that remember. It is a place where history and myth intertwine, where the human and the supernatural walk side by side, where the veil between worlds is thin as morning mist. Somewhere out there, Corrag watches over her glen, her curse protecting the descendants of those she tried to save. Somewhere out there, Eilean Munde holds its silent dead, the island keeping its eternal vigil. Somewhere out there, the Ballachulish Goddess gazes across the narrows with quartz eyes, as she has for 2,600 years. And somewhere out there, the ghosts of the MacDonalds walk the glen, where they lived and died, where they built their homes and raised their children, and believed they were safe. They were not safe, but they are remembered, and perhaps that is its own kind of immortality. Rest now by the fire. Let the stories settle around you like falling snow. Let the wind outside carry its ancient songs, and know that in Glencoe, the Glen of Weeping, memory endures. The dead are not forgotten, the past is not past, and the mountains, patient and eternal, continue their watch. Sleep well, and if you found comfort and wonder in this journey through Scotland's shadowed glens, please consider sharing it. A like, a subscribe, a quiet word of thanks. They mean more than you might think. Here by the fireside, here in the heart of Caledonia. Good night from Glencoe. Good night from the Highlands. Good night.